Hey guys, another one-take review, and today I want to talk about the Smashing Pumpkins' Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness. Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness is a kind of crazy album. I mean, it defined the Smashing Pumpkins' career. It kind of cemented them as a mainstay in alternative rock and in the mainstream of rock music, and also delivered the band some of their biggest hits, like Bullet with Butterfly Wings in 1979. But more than anything, this is probably one of the most downright ambitious records to ever hit a mainstream audience. I mean, seriously, just look at the runtime of this album. This album is over 2 hours long from front to back, and, well, if you gotta review something, you gotta listen to it from start to finish, maybe multiple times, and, well, thankfully, I have no life, and I mean, barely any friends, so I had some time to kill, so I wasted over 2 hours listening to this record, and, well, I liked it. Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness is actually technically split into two different sections. The first is called Dawn to Dusk, and the second is called Twilight to Starlight. There are some, alternative versions of it and whatnot. I actually have this album itself on CD. There's proof of that before I get called a fake fan. And I also have the second part, Twilight to Starlight, as an individual CD on its own, not from that album. And this is so I don't get called a liar. The point that I'm trying to make is that theoretically, if you want to experience this album, you don't have to listen to it from the first song to the last song. You can just listen to one section. You can take both Dawn to Dusk and Twilight to Starlight as two separate entities. It certainly doesn't help that certain songs here, like Porcelina of the Vast Oceans, go on for over 6 minutes long. Now, 6 minutes may not seem long at first, and especially not to me. I mean, one of my favorite songs is a over 20-minute long song, 2112 by Rush, but at the same time, in the context of an over 2 hour long album, 6 minutes kind of feels like an eternity. What I'm trying to say is, if this record sounds intimidating to you, or if I'm making it sound like an intimidating listen right now, yeah, you're within your rights, because it is. However, with that being said, the Smashing Pumpkins actually make really fair, well thought out usage of this length overall. Most of the highlights, songs like the single Zero, which is a fan favorite of the Smashing Pumpkins fan base, most of them are found on Dawn to Dusk. However, Twilight to Starlight proves to be a very underrated portion of the record that delivers some great cuts that is almost equally as great as the tracklist on Dawn to Dusk, especially songs like the even more popular 1979, which is pretty much their most famous song that isn't called Bullet with Butterfly Wings. Of course, the primary issue that comes with making an album that is over 2 hours long is the fact that, well, it can come across as a little over-ambitious at times. With that fact set aside, some of the more droning kind of drag-on tracks here, the fact that the Melancholy and Infinite Sadness can be such a moving and constantly enjoyable record, even through its last quarter of tracks with songs like We Only Come Out at Night, is undeniably impressive whether you actually personally enjoy the album or not. However, that doesn't prevent a variety of songs here from not having any sense of progression or development or really even purpose on the record overall. While there are interesting ideas galore and a number of absolute classics here, both deep cuts and singles, to be found throughout Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, there's just a bit too much inessential filler for it to be a masterpiece in the truest sense of the term. Anyways, it's time for me to move on from the length and the track list and actually maybe talk about the album itself, perhaps, maybe. There are times where Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness can be very emotionally driven, which I personally find to be some of the record's best moments. While the Smashing Pumpkins would eventually become a fairly stoic band once they became less the Smashing Pumpkins and more Billy Corgan and some other people that aren't actually the Smashing Pumpkins but are still using the name because they need to make more money than they otherwise would, this is a proof that, the band are capable of such emotional devastation, or at least were at one point, with the proper, actual, good lineup and the right point in time in their career. If anything tells you about the atmosphere that's built here, it's that the title is pretty apt. That isn't to say that Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness is melancholy and sadness is truly infinite. Songs like Jelly Belly take on a harder, almost grungier tone that fits in more with that Seattle grunge wave and the likes of artists like Alice in Chains than it does the dreamier side of the album that most people are familiar with. While these harder rocking tracks may not exactly reach the same heights or levels of memorability as some of these softer, dreamier, and just generally more atmospheric songs, Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness needs these songs, as it really does find, in its 2 hour length, a perfect balance between piano and fortissimo. In terms of actual musical performance, the band sound absolutely fantastic here, except what is going to be a very cliche thing to point out for the band, Billy Corgan's vocals. Of course, he's a fine guitarist, pianist, songwriter, but his vocal work is just, I'm not saying his vocals are horrible all the time, but they can be very grating, and I can't help but wonder if songs like Bullet with Butterfly Wings wouldn't be at least a little bit better without the slightly frustrating nasal of Corgan. This rings true for some softer cuts as well, like In the Arms of Sleep. However, that doesn't really affect the album too much, and generally speaking, Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness is almost flawlessly performed as far as instrumentals go. Overall, Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness is an impressive feat from the Smashing Pumpkins. Logically, an album from a band like the Smashing Pumpkins that's as long as this record happens to be really shouldn't work out, especially considering the Smashing Pumpkins' track record for having released a maximum of 3 or 4 good albums and then creating just pure garbage afterwards. You wouldn't think that this album would work out as well as it does. Nonetheless, the band's ability to deliver exactly what you might expect from the title itself is very obvious throughout the 120 some minutes that it goes on for. It truly is a shame seeing the vicious mediocrity of what they're putting out now, if you even want to still call them the Smashing Pumpkins. Again, it's more like Billy Corgan and maybe some other people, kind of, because they really were a band that were verging on true, iconic, legendary masterpiece status. This doesn't quite cut it, but man, is it close at times, which is why I'm giving it 4.5 stars out of 5. This is definitely a classic, but I wouldn't exactly call it a masterpiece either. It's got some flaws. The length can be a bit much if you're trying to, listen to it for the first time from front to back. I mean, obviously, I had heard the album before I made this video and reviewed it for this video, so I was a little more comfortable with it, but for someone who may be new to the band, it may be a bit intimidating, maybe start off with something a little bit shorter, which, I mean, their earlier years were known for longer albums, but my point is, Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness, it's a great album, even with its length, and maybe some slightly cringeworthy nasally vocals from Billy Corgan, but nonetheless, it doesn't stop it from being a wonderful listen with some really amazing songs, so 4.5 stars out of 5. And with that being said, that's the end of this review, and I'll see you guys in the next one.